Most of this came about because about 4 or 5 years back, we started talking to customers and asking them how they managed email, and we're always determining what's going on site, getting feedback and sending it up. And what we found is that people were deploying smaller mailboxes. Most mailboxes are around 50 megs to 100 megs or so. But there was this legal aspect that started to come into play where, due to case law or some discovery request, the organization had to produce messages that were stored on their, or that were written email messages in the system. And customers started to turn towards their existing backup systems because for typical customers 5 to 7 years ago, the information was stored in those backup tapes or on backup tapes or potentially a disk-to-disk backup, for example. And we also saw a beginning of customers start to deploy tools to pull mail out of Exchange or archive it out, for example, so that this data could be stored in a longer-term repository, often 5 or 7 or 10 years, depending on the regulatory statute. And then that application would be used to discover or store messages. And what we found is that often these applications started to add tie-ins or links back to Outlook, and we realized there was a point or a need for organizations to have messages longer than the period of time they had them in their mailbox, which might be a short period of time if you had a 50 meg or 100 meg quota. And we started to change Exchange to match that customer need. So in 2007, you saw us add some high availability features. You also saw us start talking about larger mailboxes or mailboxes in the couple of gig range. Who here has a mailbox that's over 1 gigabyte in size or has a standard in the organization for 1 gig? How about 2 gig? Anybody 5 gig or over? Do we have some of those? And is that not just your mailbox, right? This is the standard for the organization as well. How many people have over 5 gig mailbox quotas? Oh, so we're seeing a few. What we found, what we've tried to do is tailor the product of Exchange to basically allow you to have a larger mailbox and retain information in there for a longer period of time. And then we're also, with 2010 at RTM, gave you the ability to have an archive mailbox. And so in the archive mailbox, you could then move the content that you may have historically had in PSTs. And we had a few different ways to do this, right? We had PSTs available in all versions of Exchange going back to the early versions in the late 90s, 5 and 5.0. And Outlook 97, I think, had the option for creating the PST format. We're also seeing these PST files becoming the de facto transmission mechanism. If you have a legal discovery or a case law, for example, a case in progress, and you need to exchange information with outside counsel, typically the way that information is transferred back and forth is in that PST format. About a year and a half ago, we actually opened up the PST format to all vendors, so it's an open standard now. Other vendors also can read and write to that PST format, assuming it's the Unicode format and allows the larger sizes. But the concept in Exchange is really we wanted to provide more than what we had in the basic archiving or the PST areas. We gave you the archive mailbox in RTM, but what customers were asking us for is we want to really separate this archive mailbox from the concept of the primary mailbox. So at RTM, your archive mailbox and your primary mailbox are both linked or stored on the same actual mailbox database. The archive mailbox is really just a second mailbox inside of Exchange. We had a separate quota policy that can apply to it, for example. And our philosophy was you would take this concept of your primary mailbox, which would be maybe 1 to 5 gigabytes, and you would have this archive mailbox, which might be 5 to 20 gigabytes or so, and that would be enough to store all the information that you were receiving over a 5-year or 7-year or 10-year period of time, basically to allow you to have that longer-term storage process. What we found is that customers, and this actually helps align us with our storage story. So if you watched some of the sessions from TechEd North America on Exchange 2010 and the substantial changes in the storage model, what we're really trying to enable you to do is deploy these mailboxes to very large, slow disks. So you kind of have two choices when you're buying storage for Exchange. You can buy some expensive or the $500 to $2,000 range drives that are running at 10,000 or 15,000 RPM or higher spindle speeds, or you can buy the 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte or coming soon larger, right, drives that run at 7,200 RPM. They're a little bit slower in terms of data throughput, but they offer significantly higher capacities as well as a significantly lower price point. The price point on these is in the $100 to $300 range often in the US. And so as customers deploy email infrastructure onto these drive types, what we want them to do is have a mix of both data that's available normally as well as data that's going to be at rest and accessed very periodically. So as you mix or commingle your storage types, as well as some of the achievements in capacity and throughput that we've had in 2010, you're effectively able to use large capacity, slower spindle drives inside of the organization. And that was our story at RTM was, hey, why don't you, instead of deploying high-speed drives for your mailboxes and lower speed drives for and larger capacity drives for your archive mailboxes, deploy just a single drive for your organization, place both the primary mailbox and the archive mailbox on those drives, and you'll have a simpler management story. What we found, though, as we talked to customers, is they either already had a storage system or they weren't ready to make the change to go to that different drive model for their primary mailbox, and they really wanted the concept or practicality of that archive mailbox, but on a different storage system. So as we've mentioned this summer, in SP1 you can now place the archive mailbox on a separate database. We'll actually walk you through a demo in a couple minutes to show you how that process looks, as well as the integration factors of being able to move your primary mailbox and your archive mailbox separately, for example. Another feature request that's come up since we've released RTM is the ability to do PST imports and exports in bulk. So we provided Exchange 2010 RTM. We gave you this concept of the archive mailbox. We said this is a great online PST replacement. You can import all your organization's PSTs to the user's archive mailboxes. You can disable access to PSTs, and now all of your data will be discoverable inside of Exchange. Users will have access to that. It will be backed up. If they lose their workstation, we won't lose that PST or that archive mailbox because it's online and inside of Exchange. So in SP1, we've also given you some tools around importing and exporting, or bulk import and export for PSTs. Now you have the capacity to have a file share, for example. One of the other caveats of this is that we don't support today accessing PST files over a network device. So if you have Outlook clients and you wanted to store your PSTs on a file share, the latency introduced by that is not supported yet inside of the Outlook clients, and so therefore we can see data corruption and data loss in those scenarios. As we went through the process for developing the import-export process from PSTs, we realized that requiring Exchange admins to have space on their Exchange server for the possibly hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of PSTs in the org probably wasn't an effective way to use this bulk import-export. So we now, the bulk import-export tool does support accessing a PST over the network. So if you consolidate your PSTs to a file share internally or some sort of services that are available on the network, you'll be able to do in a supported fashion import and export those PSTs inside of Exchange as well as export them out from Exchange. Two other common requests were, hey, we like this concept of the archive mailbox, but telling me that I need Outlook 2010 or OA 2010 in order to access it is a very limiting factor, right? Especially if I consider I haven't deployed Outlook 2010. If OA 2010 is the only way to get to it, I can't import and export a PST from OA 2010. We're all on Outlook 2007. We've heard that message as well. Outlook 2007 now includes access to the archive mailbox. So if you have an Outlook 2007 client, we're happy to say that if you deploy 2010, enable a mailbox for an archive, that archive mailbox will show up in 2007 as well. You can delegate access to the archive mailbox. So another request was, I want the admin assistant or the executive assistant to have delegate permissions to the executive's archive. We provided that. Other requests are, well, it's great that you have the Outlook client, but we've got a subset of Macintosh users, or we have a subset of Linux users, or for our engineering workstation, for example, and we need to, they use Thunderbird or these POP or IMAP clients. So POP and IMAP do not have access to the online archive, but we've added or extended Exchange Web Services to provide read-write access into that archive mailbox. This will allow POP or IMAP client vendors to add EWS support to get to the online archive. This also ensures that our Mac clients can get to it with clients that use EWS as well. Other changes that we've made are really around the move, delete, and hold, as well as the multi-mailbox search. So the move and delete policies are also called our retention and archive policies inside of ECP or the management shell, are a way for you to configure how long a message will remain in the user's mailbox before it gets moved to the archive. That's your move policy. or your archive policy, and the other is your retention policy. Retention policy is how long do we retain the message, whether it's in the archive or in the primary mailbox. Additionally, we have the hold policy. Litigation hold is our way for you to mark a mailbox as well as the archive as something that any changes the user will make should be auditable and recoverable. So as a user deletes an item, for example, we put the item on the side, we show the item as deleted from their mailbox, but this dumpster 2.0 or the shadow area will continue to grow as long as that user is on litigation hold. This also applies for a new feature called Search and Destroy, which allows you to look for messages that contain specific content and delete those messages throughout all mailboxes, primary and archive, inside of the organization. If you run the Search and Destroy process, and that Search and Destroy process comes across some content that happens to be in a mailbox where litigation hold is enabled, it won't actually delete those items, but it will prompt you to export them and put an audit trail inside of the mailbox. So if a person is on litigation hold, search and destroy is the only process we have that will remove that content, but it will also export that content to a PSD file or some other format that you specify. For users not on litigation hold, search and destroy is going to go out and actually delete and purge that information through those mailboxes. We have the concept of discovery, and the compliance officer was released at RTM. We provided capacity at RTM to allow that discovery or compliance officer to effectively use ECP instead of the PowerShell to gather or do that multi-mailbox search. But what we found is that a lot of compliance officers wanted to run several searches until they were able to optimize a set of search results. Either the first one is too broad or too narrow. And many times, if they're executing the search against either all users or a larger subset of users, it may have taken days or potentially, at least hours, potentially days, sometimes a week or so for that search to complete, depending on the size of the organization and the search type or the search query that they executed. In our SP1, we now have something called Search Preview. So the compliance officer will execute the search. The search will query the indexes available on all the servers and tell us how many hits, how many instances, how many messages would be returned if we were to go ahead and actually execute that search. So they can start the search process, run the search preview option, see the highlights of the results, and then decide whether or not they want to execute the full search, or they need to additionally tune that by changing the words or the mailboxes that are going to be searched inside of there. Another common request was that if I sent a message to Lougheed, for example, and I mentioned CXX Holdings, compliance officer does a multi-mailbox search, it will return the message both from my mailbox and from Lougheed's mailbox, the one in my sent items, etc. So we have multiple items being returned that have the same content or the same actual message ID. Deduplication after discovery means that we'll only return a single set of that message or one copy of the message, just to reduce the amount of information that the compliance officer or legal person has to go through in order to retain or discover or export that to provide outside counsel or internal legal counsel. So a quick summary, there's some significant changes around archiving in Exchange 2010 SP1, as well as the move and delete / hold policies and the discovery or multi-mailbox search. Another request or common question is around journaling. Do we have a way to provide or store the journal reports, for example, in this archive mailbox? We're working through that today. If you contact your local Microsoft Services account team, we can talk to you about some of the options we have shipping today with Exchange 2010 SP1, and this is also a direction that the product group is investing in post SP1, which is to provide you a repository for journal messages. So if you have the requirement around journaling, whether that be database or transport journaling, we'll give you some options around being able to store those without sending them off to a third-party system. So we did a lot of discussions around the highlights. Let's talk a little bit more detail about what some of these options actually mean. The goal at RTM and post SP1 for the archive mailbox is really to give that user, as we say, a PSD replacement option. Let them store their PSDs, but have it on at a location that's accessible, that's available, and that's backed up. The archive mailbox does not synchronize down to the user's client. Our assumption is that often used data would be something that you would synchronize locally, and data that you access at a less periodic interval is something that if you have network connectivity, so as long as you are, excuse me, you're connected to the network either internally or if you're publishing Outlook Anywhere, for example, to the internet and you're connected on the internet, you'd be able to search and discover the data in the archive mailbox. Our vision as well is that over the next couple of years, as organizations go ahead and deploy 2010 and 2010 SP1, the form factor of the user's device to access mail also comes into play. We expect mailbox sizes would be the mailbox plus the archive mailbox to be in the 10 to 30 gigabyte range in a couple of years from now. We already see organizations today at that level in some cases. And having a synchronization experience on a small form factor device is difficult just due to the physics involved. So if we're trying to synchronize 20 or 40 gigabyte mailboxes plus archives down to a netbook, for example, or a tablet, as we see these come out in the next year or two, we're going to see difficulties in terms of both consumption of resources as well as the speed and performance of that offline store. The goal for us is to provide you a smaller size mailbox or something that can synchronize, so something in the 1 to 5 gigabyte range, for example. But that device will probably have network or internet access and therefore could query when doing a search for any of the items that have been moved off to that archive mailbox. Or with internet access, actually be able to browse that archive mailbox as well by just moving through Outlook or accessing it through OA. Other goals are around the IT Pro portion, right? So we wanted to make sure that when we give you this capacity or capability for adding or increasing your mailbox size by having a larger mailbox plus this significantly larger archive mailbox, we wanted you to use the same tools. We didn't want to ship a third product, for example, or a different server role inside of Exchange, a different interface. It's really still Exchange Management Cell, Exchange Management Console will allow you to go through, use the same create user process or enable for archive process that you're used to today. Some limitations on that. Each user can only have a single archive mailbox associated with them. So I couldn't have 2 archives, for example, associated with my primary. And we gave you some PST tools for importing and exporting this data into Exchange, as well as the capacity to support an over-the-network PST import and export. So it's typical that the compliance officer, for example, won't have access to the physical servers for Exchange, but being able to export to a PST remotely allows them to put it on their workstation or possibly a file share. The basic scenarios, new archive, right, enable an archive or connect an archive are all still there. We have additional properties around being able to connect a user to a deleted archive. So if we disable an archive in RTM, we weren't able to go back and reconnect to that existing archive. With SP1, we'll allow you to reconnect to an archive in the same process you would reconnect a disconnected mailbox object that you have with previous versions of Exchange. So let's take a quick look and show you how this looks from a demo environment where we have some Exchange 2010 SP1 content. What we have running here is a client running Windows 7 and Office 2010. We also have a 2003 domain controller and a multi-role server, CAS, hub, and mailbox on 2010. So if I go to our multi-role server, I can see, and it's a little bit of scrolling required here with the screen resolution, but let me launch Exchange Management Console. And I can see my Exchange organization. So let's create a, and I see, if I take a look here, I can see there's a change in the icons, right? So I have Adam Smith has my traditional Exchange mailbox icon, but Holly Holt and John Smith have a different type of icon representing their user object. That indicates that they have an archive mailbox associated with them. So let's create a new mailbox and see what that process looks like. We'll create a new user. We will make it a new user object in Active Directory. And any suggestions for this user, we'll call this one Joe Stark. J Stark is his login name. Give Joe Stark a password. Oops, I didn't want to check the box for next logout, sorry. And we can specify now the mailbox database. If we don't specify a mailbox database here, our load balancing logic comes into play, which is look at all the mailboxes in the, or all the databases in the organization, exclude the ones that are marked for exclusion, and randomly pick one. So if I do that, I might actually randomly pick one of my databases, which is an archive database, and I've actually set up 2 mailbox databases inside of this organization. So if I take a look and browse out, I will see the choice come up for the databases to choose from, and you can see I've created both a mailbox database as well as an archive database that are available. We'll put Joe into the mailbox database. We'll hit OK. We could specify a retention policy or active sync policy at this point in time. We click on Next, and we have some more options now around the archive mailbox. Before it was just enabling or disabling. Now we're giving you really 3 options. 1, don't create an archive mailbox. 2, create a local archive. A local archive means an on-premise archive. And 3, we can create a remote hosted archive. Coming in a future release of our cloud services will be the option for hosting providers to provision and exchange archiving hosted infrastructure. This will allow you to point your user's archive mailbox to this cloud or hosted provided infrastructure, so their primary mailbox is local to your organization. The archive mailbox is off in the cloud. In this case, we don't have access to a cloud providing infrastructure, so we're going to create a local archive. And again, I can either randomly select the mailbox database, but in this case, we're going to manually select it to ensure that we get the actual archive database. So click on Next. There's our configuration summary. We click on New, and we will go ahead and provision Joe Stark with an archive mailbox inside of the organization. Give that a moment to come through, and we'll log in as Joe and see what that looks like. And there's Joe Stark has been provisioned. Let's go over to our client machine. We can go to our client, log in. We'll log off first. Looks like we're logged on as somebody else. And let's log on as Joe and see if Joe can access his mailbox. While we're logging on as Joe, we're going to come back and create some additional databases in the organization and show the move process here as well. So if I come to my organization configuration, I can look at mailbox, I can look at database management, and I can create new mailbox databases such as MDB archive 02. We'll put that on the same server. So we only have one server in this organization. I'll scroll around to click on Next, keep the same default paths, and complete. While that's completing, we should see the client logged on, and we should be able to launch Outlook 2010 as this client and see Joe's archive mailbox. Next, and yes. We see it fills in the information from how to discover. It will establish a connection and finish. We'll also get a prompt that I will need to enter some license information here for Office. We'll go ahead and use the unlicensed version that we have on here right now. My lab environment was isolated from the internet, and with the application of SP1, I attached it to the internet, and therefore the licensing portion got reactivated. So here's Joe's mailbox, and there's the warning for our licensing portion. We will choose don't make any changes. And we can see Joe has a mailbox, but Joe also has an archive mailbox, right? So if I look in Joe's archive mailbox, it's basically as if Joe had a second mailbox in his organization. Content can be, Joe can create folders inside of his archive mailbox the same way that he would create folders inside of his normal mailbox. So if I check and create a new, right click, new folder, we can say project Alta data. And Joe can move content back and forth from his archive to his primary mailbox. Another feature that is available inside of 2010 and 2010 SP1 is the concept of retention policies. So if I look inside, right, my organization configuration, I can create retention tags as well as retention policies. This is basically a way to mark content, whether that be an individual message or a folder, and specify how long the item should remain in the mailbox before it moves to the archive, or how long the item should be in my mailbox or archive before it's deleted. So I can create retention policy tags, such as, we'll call this one, tag name will be 10 years, we'll call it 20 years, and delete. And personal folder means that this can be applied to a user's custom folders that they create inside of it. I can also create policies that would apply to one of the default folders, as you can see from the list, such as inbox or sent items, for example. We'll allow personal folders. We'll do 20 times 365 or 20 times 400 to be around 8,000. A little less than that would be 7,500. And what action to take when the limit is reached? I can either delete and allow recovery, which means a copy is moved over to the user's dumpster, whereupon it remains for the period of time that the dumpster is set, or the dumpster expiration period is set. By default, we're making that 30 days. You may have customized that to be shorter or longer. You can also permanently delete it or create a tag to move it to an archive, at which point this would become a move policy instead of a delete policy. Click on New, and we will create our tag, and we can create a new retention policy then. We'll call this TechEd New Zealand. And we can add specific tags to this retention policy, such as the 20-year delete. We might also add some additional ones, such as a 5-year move to archive. And we've now created a policy which means messages over 20 years old will be deleted. Messages over 5 years old will be moved off to this user's personal archive. So mailbox will be up to 5 years. Mailbox plus archive will be up to 20. User could override that potentially by specifying that some content in his mailbox is subject to a greater retention policy if they had access to more than one retention tag inside of that TechEd New Zealand retention policy. So let's switch back over to our main content, and we'll show you a little more. Archive, the concept of users working or accessing data in the archive is literally like a second mailbox. So when they see messages inside their archive, they can read, they can reply, they can mark as read, they can mark as unread, they can delete those messages. There's no preservation of the message by default inside of the archive mailbox. Moving mail back and forth can be done by dragging or dropping. It can also be done by selecting a retention policy or a retention tag either in OA or in Outlook 2010 on a folder or on an item inside of your mailbox. So we have the move. When we do a move, we can either select a folder inside of my mailbox or a folder inside of the archive. Or if I assign a move tag to that folder, all the items in that folder will fall under the constraint of that move tag and be moved to the archive. If I apply a move tag to an item, that will override the folder policy. So if my folder policy says 5 years move to archive, but I define another move tag that says 10 years move to archive, and I apply the 10-year tag to a message, that message will be retained for 10 years inside of the folder. The most explicit policy will win in this case. We're applying policies to both the mailbox and the archive mailbox. IT Pro, we showed you how simple it was to basically attach or create an archive mailbox. Now that we've created a second mailbox database, we can actually go ahead and move that content as well. If we take a look back in our demo environment, we can see that pretty quickly. So we can look at Joe Stark. I believe the second database I created was for go back to database management, a second archive location. And if I want to move Joe's mailbox to another location, or archive mailbox, we can do that by move mailbox, new local move requests. And we have the choice when we're executing a move now to either move only the user, move only the archive, or move both the mailbox and the archive. One other caveat on this is that in order to move the archive mailbox separate from the mailbox, the user's mailbox must be on an SP1 database. So if I have two mailbox servers in my organization, one is RTM, one is SP1, I cannot move the archive mailboxes from RTM to the SP1 mailbox server. As long as my mailbox and archive mailbox are on an SP1 server, I have the choice then of moving individually either the mailbox or the archive. So we'll select move just the archive mailbox. We'll click, oops, and I have to pick a target database. We'll pick the archive 2. I click OK. I click on next. and have the standard options for remove around corrupted messages. We don't have much content in there, so that should complete fairly rapidly. I'll wait for that to complete. And at this point, Joe's archive mailbox then will be moved from archive database 1 to archive database 2. Some new functionality that you did not have prior in RTM. Give that just a moment to complete. Come on and move. There we go. And finish. And we can see on client 01, I can click on the inbox. I can go back to that archive mailbox and look at the data. I will see that I'll have an error message. I will close, restart Outlook, and we will have access to the archive mailbox in the new location. If I was patient enough, Outlook would come up with a message eventually that would say, your administrator has made a change. It requires you to restart Outlook. And I would see a close and restart Outlook, and I would be able to re-access my archive mailbox data, now residing on the new mailbox database. So let's switch back again. All the processes that we're showing you in the Exchange Management Console are also available via the Exchange Management Shell or PowerShell. This allows you to do a lot of bulk adds, changes, or deletes very effectively from the PowerShell interface. Auto-discover works as well for the online archive now. This is another change for SP1, which means that Outlook clients will be able to discover where the archive mailbox resides if it's been moved to a separate database inside of the organization. So in my case, you saw closing Outlook and relaunching Outlook was able to provide us with the new location of that archive mailbox without any changes to the profile or modifications in the Outlook client to enable that person to see their archive mailbox, even though it had been moved to a separate database. Removing it is the same as well, so you can disconnect the archive mailbox from user A and reconnect that archive mailbox to a separate user in the organization. Perhaps the person has left and someone needs access to the repository or content that remained inside of that archive mailbox. This allows you to reconnect it without having to log in as the individual user. Get and set allows you to set the properties of your archive mailbox. There's a different quota associated with that than is associated with your primary mailbox. So we retain that concept going forward into SP1. You're still able to have a different size available for your archive mailbox than from your primary mailbox. Migrate primary and archive. The process here is we talk to the CAS. CAS understands that your primary mailbox and archive database are located on a specific set of databases in the organization at first. Mailbox Replication Service, or MRS, will begin copying the data over to the target location. Once that's complete, we will mark and update the MS Exchange Mailbox GUID attribute for either the mailbox or the archive or both, depending on which have changed, which can then be reflected in an auto-discover request that comes down to the client. Auto-discover finds the new information and will then, if we move, for example, the archive mailbox to a different location, auto-discover will redirect us so that we'll talk to a CAS server in that location to get access to the archive or the primary mailbox instead of the original CAS server that we were talking to. All the same concepts in terms of interface for managing or changing. You got to see that in the demo, as well as a couple slides here if you don't have that happen. The tiered storage, as we said, a lot of customers. So how many of you have been waiting for the ability to place an archive database on a separate storage infrastructure to deploy, to deploy Exchange 2010 SP1? That's about the same as what we see in the US and most locations worldwide. We're finding that people have wanted to deploy their 2010 organization against their existing storage infrastructure, but wanted to add extra capacity and use that to store these archive databases. Are any of you looking, how many people here are looking at or are aware of the fact that the archive can be located now on a cloud-based provider and would evaluate that type of option for the organization? Anyone looking at that one? We see that as a subset, people saying, I'm going to be generating a significant amount of data. I already have that in PSTs. I'd like to host that in the cloud instead of setting up some additional infrastructure to hold that there. So tiered storage, here's where we can choose between the local archive or the cloud archive for SP1. Move and delete policies. We gave you a little bit of background on that. Basically, it's either going to retain the data in your mailbox or move it over to the archive. Both of those work in conjunction to ensure that the message is either in primary or archive and is deleted at the appropriate time. As we also said, it's the most granular or most specific. So if I have a tag on a folder and a tag on an item in the folder, I will use the tag on the item in the folder to override what was actually specified on the folder. The date that we use for this time period is the received time of the message, if it's in one of my subfolders, or the sent time if it was in my sent items. So we look at the context of the folder where the messages were when we're going to apply these retention tags that are associated with the folders or with the messages. We talked about archive and delete. The hold policy, or litigation hold, is our next piece that we'll show you. So let's jump a couple more here, trying to save so you saw all the tag portions. So we'll go past move and delete, and litigation hold. So litigation hold, as we said, will allow you to define this concept of the compliance officer and allow them to discover items even if user has already deleted those items. Probably simpler to demo than it is to actually show. So I have went on my domain controller. If I take a look on here in Active Directory users and computers, and I have marked one of the users, or added one of the users to the discovery management built-in role for Exchange 2010 SP1. And if I look inside of that, I can see that Adam Smith has been declared to be my compliance officer. Adam Smith, therefore, will have access to an area in the Exchange control panel allowing him to do things like enable a user for litigation hold and do compliance or mailbox search requests against those people. So let's bring up on our client machine Mr. Adam. So we'll just go ahead and log into OA here as Adam Smith. I'm not going to use the default. https mail.tailspin.com/OA. And we'll provide Adam's credentials. Oops, it's A. Smith. So Adam can log into Outlook web app. He's in there working. And Adam realizes that this new person that we've created, we just had a new hire, Mr. Joe Stark, and Joe is going to be involved in a discovery request. And the outside counsel has advised us that they want to be able to see all of Joe's messages, and because we know Joe's kind of a shady character, we want to make sure that Joe can't change anything that's happened to Joe's mailbox. So we're going to put Joe on litigation hold. Adam knows how to do that. He's going to go to options. He's going to see all options. And in all options, he'll have an Exchange control panel, some additional functionality. So by default, it has manage myself. Adam is also going to get the option to manage my organization. So we'll launch the My Organization. In My Organization, I can see a list of user objects or mailboxes that are there, as well as some properties of those mailboxes from a compliance perspective. So let's go to Joe Stark's mailbox. We'll double-click it here. And we can see some basic information around Joe Stark. But we also have some special mailbox features for Mr. Joe. So one of them, and if you can see it here, is litigation hold. And that is currently disabled for Joe Stark. But since we know that he's going to be going through this jurisdiction and discovery process, we're going to go ahead and enable that. So we also have a choice here where we can define a note. Some countries and some organizations, it's required to notify a user if they're placed on litigation hold. So anything that we put into this note will be visible in the backstage area of Outlook, as well as OA if they log on to it, to notify them that their mailbox is now on litigation hold. And whatever text I put in here will explain the results of that. I could put a link, for example, to our legal or compliance page internally, or a link for more information. In this case, the organization is not required to notify. Well, we'll make them required to notify Joe. So let's put a note that says, "We know what you've done. You are on litigation hold." I don't think Joe will be too happy to see that note, right? So let's hit OK there. And we see that it's enabled and goes into a pending state. One caveat of placing users on litigation hold is that it does take up to an hour for the change to take effect. So if you're going to place someone on litigation hold and you have the requirement for it to take effect immediately, we have an option for you to do that. It's a very simple to do process, very intuitive, or maybe not that intuitive. It's stop and start the information store service. So that's obviously going to cause an impact in your organization when you stop the store. We'll go ahead and stop that on our mailbox server, and we're going to restart that. That is going to disconnect our clients. They'll be able to reconnect. It's probably relatively invisible. If they have cached mode, they'll see a little blip, but by the time they call the help desk, it'll be working again. They won't have any concept of that Joe's just been placed on litigation hold. So let's go back to Mr. Joe. I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to actually switch over to our client again. And let's refresh. I think I have a refresh option at the top. It's a little tricky working on the lower. Oh, it shows enabled pending. I'm going to hit F5 to refresh, hit OK. I'm going to scroll down here, and oh, still showing disabled. Let's cancel and go back in. So let's go back in. I don't know if that refresh works. So let's cancel. We'll go back down. Oh, he's still enabled. That's interesting. Oh, did I not save it on the other one? Thank you. Sorry about that. So we know what you've done. You are on litigation hold. Please contact your legal counsel. There we go. So now we'll hit OK, and we'll save that. And let's save. Okay, now we'll go back and restart our information storage service. Like, that's the first time I've ever seen that one. And as we save. Yeah, and we get the message, right? The hold setting may take up to 60 minutes. We'll go back to our server. We're going to disconnect everybody again. Our compliance officer has to submit the same request. The IT people will say, let's get it right this time. We're going to drop everybody. And let's go back to our client. Let me make sure that that browser window isn't behind that one. Yep, okay. And let's go back into Joe Stark's mailbox, or mailbox settings, and validate that. So if I look now, I can see that litigation hold is enabled. It's no longer in that pending state. Joe's on litigation hold. We're going to back up in time a little bit, and we're going to go into Joe's mailbox. So we've signed in here as Joe Stark. We're going to close this. We'll leave compliance officer up. But let's go into Joe's mailbox, and Joe doesn't know yet. This is yesterday, right? So Joe decides that he's going to send an email message to Holly Holt, who happens to be in the org. Oh, I got to specify her because Joe hasn't downloaded his offline address book yet. So let's say her address is hholt@tailspin.com. And he's got a great stock tip for CXX Holdings. I've got some inside information on CXX Holdings. Let's trade for a date. This guy's really just not the best employee that you can have, right? I don't know how he slipped through our hiring process, but that's another discussion. So Joe sends this message. It'll go into his sent items. While Joe sends that message, let's also bring up a browser here to make sure that went through to Holly. So we'll sign in as Holly as well. Actually, the way we're going to do this, because we want to start we want to restart Outlook to show you the message. We're going to just log in as Holly, make sure she receives that message. We'll have her report it to the compliance officer, and that will have triggered the eventual process, right? So we got a little ahead of ourselves showing you the litigation hold. We're going to log in as Holly Holt. We should see a message in Holly's mailbox. Microsoft Office, Microsoft Outlook. And hey, look at Joe's got some, so John Smith is also sending her some information around CXX Holdings. But there's this email from Joe, right? So she's going to forward this to Adam. And Adam, what was Adam's last name? Adam Smith. You have to type Adam's name as well. I have this message from Joe. I think we need to discuss this. So Joe, meanwhile, or Adam has went in and put Joe on litigation hold. So let's log back in as Joe and see what kind of impact that has on Joe's client and what kind of action Joe might take when he sees that occur. Joe's probably a little afraid when he sees a message like that, right? So we're going to sign back in as Joe. It's Joe Stark. And Joe's going to come in the morning. He sent this email. He thinks he's got a hot date with Holly because he's giving her some inside stock tips so they can make a lot of money. And Joe launches Outlook, and Joe happens to, well, Joe's also using illegal software. He's a pretty crazy fella, this Joe. But when I look at the account settings for Joe, right, we have a notification now. Oops, not yet. Where's his little backstage area? Let me make sure that Joe's still enabled. So close this. We'll go back to mail.tailspin.com/OA. Log in as Adam Smith. And on Adams, we're going to, he sees the email from Holly. He's going to go into ECP, validate that Joe's on litigation hold. We're going to manage the organization. And let's go down and select Mr. Joe Stark. Mailbox features. Aha, Joe is enabled for litigation hold. If I click on that. All right. So we'll put a URL in there as well. We'll call it HTTPS legal inside of the org, where you can learn additional information. We'll save that. And let's see if that, it can take a while sometimes for that information to replicate out to Joe's client. He should pick that up in an auto-discover request. So we'll give that a try. If it's not there yet, let's do a, oops, sorry, file, account settings. One more restart should do it. Close that. Update all. And we'll see if our backstage area has that message yet. It doesn't. I'm not showing it there yet. Well, sometimes it takes a while for that to come out. We won't wait for that in the demo. We should have it by the end of the demo, however. So, meanwhile, Joe sees it, assumes that when Joe sees this message, he's on litigation hold. Joe gets a little worried, right? And he knows he sent this message over to Holly. So he calls Holly. Says, Holly, delete this message from your mailbox. I want to delete it from mine. Looks like we might have some sort of investigation. I don't want to get you in trouble. So Joe's a pretty smart guy, too. He knows about shift delete, right? So when we do a shift delete, it's going to delete that message, and it's going to remove it from his deleted items because he doesn't want it sticking around his deleted items. He's heard that administrators have a way to search on that deleted items area. So now Joe's mailbox is empty. His inbox is empty. Sent items is empty. His deleted items is empty. His Project Alta data is empty. He thinks he's covered his tracks pretty well. But we're going to go in as our compliance officer here and see what we can do to discover that. So let's create a new multi-mailbox search. We'll create a new search. Our keywords here will be CXX Holdings. There's a checkbox for include items that can't be searched. And a lot of people have questions on what this means. It's a little odd in that phrasing. What this means is that if there's an attachment and we don't have a filter in the search index to index the contents of that attachment, perhaps it's an AutoCAD drawing, or maybe we haven't installed the Office 2007 or Office 2010 filter pack, we're going to return all those attachments that can't be searched as well. In this case, we know that it's not an attachment. We know it's part of the standard email message, so we can reduce or simplify our option there. We can specify to or from email addresses, mailboxes to search, right? We'll do a search all mailboxes. And search name, type, and storage location. Here we'll have to actually specify some information. So search name, we'll call this TechEd search. Oops, Tech Search Demo. We'll save that. And we can see that the search is in process. Size right now is 0 bytes. We can refresh this as it runs. And we can see that we have 4 items around 12K in size. You also may have seen there that I could, in that search, include just the search results or the query just the search index, so I could get an estimate instead of actually gathering all those search results. But that search is already completed. It was a relatively quick one. We're going to go back to Adam's mail, and Adam wants to go and look at that discovery mailbox then to see what those search results are. So, whoops, not options, but let me scroll up. Instead of Adam Smith, we're going to open the discovery mailbox. We'll go ahead and open that. And when I open the discovery mailbox, I can see that there's some search results there. So let's refresh that. I can see that there's TechEd. I can see some results. I can see the previous search. I could have sworn that I saw that search result was completed there. Hold on a moment. Let's go back. Oh, I know what happened. See all options. Oops. Organize. Why is Adam Smith not... Oh, this is Discovery Search Mailbox. My bad. Let's go back to Adam Smith's. In the flashlight for the demo, I neglected to specify the Discovery Mailbox as the search results. So let me do that, and we'll show you the results. See all options. Now I can see Manage, My Organization, Mail Control. Let's... and we only have an estimate because we did not select the option to export those results. So that's the new SP1 functionality. If we want to actually see what those results are, we'll need to copy the search results to the mailbox. We'll put them in the discovery mailbox. We'll have it send us an email when complete, and I can go ahead and save it. If I can find the save button. It's tricky with these 700 there it is. So save. Now let's we can see the search is running again, and now our search has completed and exported the results to the Discovery Search Mailbox. So I should be able to go back to Mail. I should be able to go to Open Additional Mailboxes. I can see that the search TechEd Search Demo has completed now. We'll open the Discovery Mailbox. Open. And we see that the TechEd Search Demo folder is there. And I can see that Joe Stark, whose mailbox I just created, has some content. Adam Smith has some content because Joe forwarded that information off to Adam, and Holly Holt. So I can go to each one of these folders. I can see Joe's primary mailbox. I can see that it was in his recoverable items, which means his dumpster, which means that Joe tried to delete this message, right? So what we have also found is from certain case laws that where users file or the actions that they take can indicate some type of action. One of the person trading stock information had it in a folder called goodies, and that was enough information for the jury to determine that that was known information that the person had received and acted upon. So I can see that in deletions that Joe has deleted this item from his dumpster, meaning it went to deleted items and he deleted it, or he took Shift Delete to hide this message. And there's the message from Joe going to Holly saying, I've got some inside information, let's trade that for a date. I would not want to be Joe when he has to talk about that information in a court. So that's the legal discovery, or the discovery process, which includes both, as you can see, the search results, giving you a quick, rapid, there's 4 items, 3 mailboxes that it's touching, or being able to export that out to a discovery mailbox and see that information inside of the discovery mailbox as well. You can create multiple discovery mailboxes in your organization if you have separate compliance officers, or if you have sensitive searches that need to be restrained or limited in terms of who would have access to it. You would just have the compliance officers pick that other compliance mailbox when exporting those search results, as you saw in ECP. And as we saw as well, Adam completed all of that information from the Exchange Control Panel. With that, I think we're close to our hour of time. So I would like to take any questions you may have on SP1 changes or archiving and compliance in general. Let's see, up front, you had the first one, I think, right there. Pardon? So shift delete or going to deleted items and deleting it is the same process. So if he deletes it from deleted items, empties his dumpster, does anything like that that he can do, it's going to be moved to that dumpster 2.0 when someone's on litigation hold, and it will be recoverable in one of those discovery processes. Yes, you'll see it coming from the dumpster 2 area instead. Yes. So who watches the watchers? That's a very expansive question. The same watchers who are watching those watchers in society as general. Obviously, your compliance officers are going to have a significant amount of capability. Some organizations will limit compliance officers via RBAC to have the ability only to check subsets, and the internal affairs group to watch the compliance officers and their results. So the other piece where this question comes up is, do we support the 2 hands or 4 eyes approach, right, where you can't get access to it unless 2 separate physical people each knows half the password, for example, or in the missile silo the 2 keys are located too far apart to hold it. You can create a compliance officer object that has a password that only 2 people know half of it, and so therefore 2 people are required to log in or execute those searches, for example. And yes, question. You can put another question comes up often is, how many users can you put on litigation hold? You could theoretically put everybody in your organization on litigation hold. The second one is, how long can they be on litigation hold? That's a great question. We have seen some people asking, well, I'd like to put everybody on litigation hold for 5 years and have that meet my organization's compliance policy. We're doing testing around that right now to kind of see would that cause any constraints or limits. At this point, we believe the answer is no, but I would advise you to work with your local support team. It's kind of testing in progress right now to see what that upper limit is around litigation hold. The other piece of that is that litigation hold does not give you everything that journaling gives you. So journaling will, if I send a message to a distribution list, when that message goes through Hub, I will see, this Andrew is supposed to be journaled, so I'm going to mark it to go through the journaling process. The journaling process will take the original message, put it as an attachment to the journal report, and then expand the distribution list so that we know who was in the DL at the specific time that message was sent and expand it in that DL, right? Litigation hold will show that I sent to the DL, but it won't show the membership of that DL. So there's some small changes. We're looking at that type of functionality post SP1 as well. So to try to address, you'll have a couple options, either journal to a repository that we provide, or have this litigation hold plus some potential changes if you need to capture all of the state of a message at the time that it was sent. But for now, it's at the minimum several months to a year or 2. Upper range is to be determined, and we're kind of working through that to do some testing. But it can be rather, we know that they can grow to several gigabytes in size, for example. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, so if I have the quickest way probably is to show you my personal archive mailbox, right? So I'll launch Outlook. And I have an archive policy set for a couple of distribution list folders. We have a E12 talk and an E14 talk at Microsoft for questions on 2007 or questions on 2010. And I have that roll over after 6 months. So if I look at and it's a little hard to see on this resolution, but you can see here that I have some folders, and I can see, just to make sure, let me go down to my archive mailbox to show you which folders we're talking about. Can I scroll that up? Nope. I can minimize favorites. That gives me some more space. And let's bring this down. So here is my archive mailbox. You can see archive AHRANS and E12DLs, E14, and E14 TAP all have a lot of content in them in my archive. If I go to my Exchange folders where those exist, I can see E12DLs. If I right-click that, as Outlook becomes responsive as I just launched it, and go to Properties, I can see on the policy page that it's set to archive older than 6 months. So I could change that. That's the shortest tag that I have available. You can see when it created those, it created inbox/knowledge/E12DLs. I didn't pre-stage any of that information. So when I mark folders to be archived in my primary mailbox, when either content or that folder is ready to be archived, we will create the underlying folder structure of that archive in the archive mailbox. So if you look at knowledge, for example, I don't think anything yet has expired in my base knowledge folder, right? So there's nothing there. However, if I come up to knowledge, you can see that there's 23 items. None of those have yet triggered the creation of the knowledge folder. It was the content in E12DLs that forced the creation of knowledge and the sub-creation of E12DLs. Pardon? People wonder how we know a lot of that stuff, right? We don't keep it all in our head. Most of the time I have to go look it up, and that's my spot to look things up. I think you were up first. Yes. Yep, so the default is to search both at the same time, I believe. Let me take a quick check up here. Let me go back to inbox. And let me try let's see, search this. Oh, I thought there used to be I think because of the screen resolution, it's hidden some of the Outlook elements. Normally there's a drop-down on the search which allows you to specify this folder, my inbox, entire mailbox. Entire mailbox would include your archive, and that comes from Outlook or from OA. So when you're doing the search in other client, you'll hit the search index, which will then be scoped to whatever you specified in that search tab parameter. Yep, it's in their mailbox, so in their mailbox location in the database, but it's not visible to them, and it does not count against their quota. So if you have a 2 gig, it's possible when you enable people for litigation hold, they might have a 2 gig mailbox quota with 1.5 gig of content in their mailbox syncing, but 7 or 9 gigabytes of data in the database because they're on litigation hold and all of that previous content has been retained. You would see the mailbox size in the database being different from the mailbox size being reported as the individual mailbox. And we'll give you reports that show you both of those to give you the amount of data in litigation hold. And next question is the data stored indefinitely? Data in litigation hold is stored as long as that user is on litigation hold. We do have, so another request was the concept of search and destroy, which some of you may remember from Xmerge. Prior when we had Xmerge, we could find keywords or specific messages and delete them in a database or all databases. Search and destroy, when activated against an archive mailbox database that has litigation hold enabled, will not delete the content, it will prompt you to export it. So you'll have to export it, and there will be a log of that in the mailbox saying that someone has executed a search and destroy and removed content that was under litigation hold. So someone doing a discovery would see that someone tried to administratively remove content from the litigation hold mailbox. If you accidentally delete the mailbox, that it would become like a normal remove mailbox. So the mailbox becomes separated from the user object, will remain in the database, both mailbox content plus litigation hold content, for the period that you've defined for your deleted mailbox retention time. There was one in the, was it yours? Is there load on the CPU or memory or storage probably while going through a discovery process? The answer to that, significant is relative. The request, if you're doing a search for results, will query the search index, and so that's a very rapid response. So if you're going to have approximately X hits with X items, you'll see marginal load on that. If your request is to export the data to the discovery mailbox as well, we will run that task, but we will run it as a lower priority in exchange so that it doesn't negatively impact normal user operations on the server, which is why the compliance officer may say, wow, it takes me 5 hours or 4 days, for example, to complete some of these larger requests, but people during the normal operations won't notice that. Yes? You can only have, question is how many archived mailboxes per user? You can only have one archived mailbox associated per user object. Pardon? Oh, to connect it to someone, you'd have to connect, yeah, so the action to connect the archive mailbox to an existing mailbox would only work if that mailbox didn't already have an archive mailbox. And I know yours was up there, sorry. Question is the archive. That's an excellent question. I think you got me. I am pretty confident that it runs on a periodic interval, not 24 hours a day, but we'll look that one up. I will take a look on my machine as we're shutting down. If you want to float down after, we'll try to find the answer. If not, I'll get some contact information and shoot it back. So, sorry. Okay. So that's a tricky question, because the answer is you can talk to your local Microsoft consulting team and they can give you some options around that. What we don't have an option in a wizard or in the GUI to do that automatically today, but there are some ways we can work with Exchange to give you an option around that. And that is an area that the product group is investing in. Kamal announced that this summer at TechEd North America, that we hear the story that for some of you, litigation hold is not the best solution for retaining information. It's really meant to be a specific use case scenario. For the organizations that have journaling, we want to give you a repository for those journal messages and then have that still be discoverable, possibly integrated with user search. We're moving, but nothing shipping in SP1 will do that for you simply today. We have some other options, like I said, but that's the limit of where we're at, except for the knowledge that investment is going in that area. Yes. So the process, so that data, it would be like a user deleting a 4 gig attachment, right? All of a sudden, all those. So the question is, what happens when you disable litigation hold for a user? What happens in the database itself? That all those pages are marked as available. So even though there's content there, right, we'll gradually start writing data over them. Pardon? That'll happen within that. So what the question is, how often or how soon will that happen? It takes up to 60 minutes to enable or disable litigation hold. After that is noted, those pages become available. If you've got page zeroing turned on, we're going to go and write zeros across all of the data on those pages to zero it out. Yes. Yep. Yeah. So I have good news for you and bad news for you. The question is, I have these hundreds or thousands or dozens or PST files. You mentioned this import-export PST process. How does that work? What we are offering in SP1 is PowerShell interface for that. So you'd have to script it out and provide a CSV file with the paths, etc. However, we also provided this information to a series of partners, and there's several partners now who are writing GUI plugins, or an interface basically to help you manage, read in PSTs from profiles, for example, and discover the location, and then import that into an archive mailbox. So what we have is import and export PowerShell commandlets that'll import and export PSTs to either a mailbox or an archive mailbox. If you know where the PSTs are, those are useful. If those PSTs are in Outlook profiles and things, you'll probably be looking at a third-party partner tool to kind of discover locations and do the import for that user. Yes. Another good question. What functionality is available and unavailable in Outlook 2007? Outlook 2007 will show you the archive mailbox. You can move content back and forth, but retention policy and retention tags, I believe, are not going to be in the 2007 client. So they can go into OA, apply tags to folders or items, right, and it'll move. But in Outlook 2007, the client just doesn't have that property page view that's inside of there. And I don't know if that's coming. I don't think it's coming. Yes, question. So the question is, can you archive based on folders to go to different tiers of disk? The answer to that is yes, if you support one tier. So if your archive mailbox or archive databases are on, let's say your primary mailboxes are on fiber channel drives, your archive mailboxes are on SATA, you can have a policy that'll move to the archive mailbox. Archive mailbox will be on SATA, therefore you're going to a different tier. But we don't have a third tier option. So we wouldn't be able to say fiber channel to 10K drives to 7200 RPM drives, for example. Oh, so after it expires from the, question is, let's say we get to this 5 or the 7 year interval, what happens after that? Are there options to move it? Our options right now are delete. We don't have another option to say export to a PST and move to this third location or a different area on the network, for example. We have some people looking at scripting that out where they'd move that content to other databases which happen to be somewhere else and roll over the databases periodically, for example. This also brings up the question, or reminds me to bring up, there's a how many of you people, does anyone here have a requirement around worm storage or is deploying write once